Okay, folks, we are going to go ahead and get started. The point of this video is to just kind of talk you through how I approach some mixed media techniques. So I wanted you to kind of see my setup here. I already have, I usually put something down on the table, a piece of newsprint or newspaper, because I get really messy. I always have paper towel nearby. This is one of my favorite tools ever, is just some of those fake plastic credit cards that you can get, because I like to use this to collage with to make sure my pieces are flat. I've got some Liquitex matte medium, which I'm going to be using. I've got a cup of water, and I've got some acrylic paints, a palette knife, and a brush for now. Okay. And I just want to kind of talk you through some different techniques that I use. So you can see I've already actually done quite a bit to this. So this is collage. There are pieces of books, book pages, there's scrapbook paper, there's maps that I have all collaged down using matte medium. And anytime I am doing a mixed media piece, I always try to think about what my anchor piece is. So people try to do too much all at once. So all of this, it looks kind of busy, even though it's fairly neutral colors, kind of harmonious. We want to still be able to have kind of our main focal point. So I'm thinking about rule of thirds. When I divide this vertically and horizontally, the intersection of those points, one of those places would be a really good place to have a focal point. And this is just a picture that I printed off Google. And this is the same technique that I did to create the background. A lot of what mixed media is, to me, as far as a starting point goes, is just creating a beautiful and interesting surface for your background. And then I kind of try to let my storytelling take over. So here's some matte medium. I'm going to apply some over the top, and usually I do a little bit larger area than I think that I actually need. I'm going to stick my piece of paper over the top, and I'm being intentional to put it in that rule of thirds area, but then I'm going to apply the medium over the top again. And it does dry fairly quickly, so I am applying it fairly liberally. And then I use my card here to kind of squish out any air bubbles that I might have. And that will help the piece to lay flat. Okay, so using that technique is how I did the whole background. So any types of pieces that you might consider. I know sometimes I like to use tissue because I think that the translucency of it or transparency of it is really interesting. So I'm just going to put a few more pieces in here. This is an old sewing pattern. I'm just going to put a few more things in here. And you can see that I can see the map and things through it. With your collage elements, especially when you're thinking about the background, think about having different irregular shapes. You don't really want to have hard edge lines necessarily. You want to repeat your colors so that it feels cohesive, that it feels connected. You're creating unity. So that's why I am putting a few different pieces in here and thinking about where they are in relationship to each other, because I really want to have a strong visual balance on my image. And you don't have to overthink it a whole lot. Now, because this paper is so thin, I'm really not needing to use my little card. It actually might do more harm than good because it might rip it. I feel like this part up here is maybe missing a little bit. So as I mentioned, I'm just trying to create some unity here. I think I might do like one more piece up here. There we go. Okay, so I've got kind of a variety going on. Now, one of the things that I want to do next is use this matte medium to change the opacity of my paint, okay? This allows your acrylic paint to act almost like watercolor in the fact that you can make it translucent. And this will help change the opacity. So my background is very, very busy right now, and I'm gonna use the matte medium to help create a little bit more opaque areas, but not totally opaque, because I wanna be able to see some of the color and texture through it, okay? So I have my palette knife over here. A lot of people I know just like mix with their brush in between different colors, and sometimes I do that as well. But for the sake of this video, I do want to show you a little bit about mixing with a palette knife. I'm going to take a tiny portion of this blue color. I think this is Payne's Gray. I'm going to smear it over there. I'm going to take a tiny bit of this. Okay, and the whole point of this is so that you're not gumming up your brush, okay? Kind of hear that little sound. So I'm scraping it and then kind of flipping the pile of paint over. I'm going to come over here and get a little bit of a lighter tone to lighten it up. And this is really helpful for when you're mixing, especially like a large area of paint, and you don't want to run out of that specific color. I have to keep mixing it. So I'm scraping and I'm flipping. Okay, and you can kind of see I've got that nice color. Make sure that you're trying to get all of your paint. Sometimes I might have to take my brush and wipe a little bit off and then back down there. Okay. Ideally, I would have done that with a clean brush, but I only brought one over here. Okay, so now I have a color kind of mapped out, kind of this turquoise color. Sometimes I will mix my paint with the medium in its own little container. Other times I will just do it straight on my palette, okay? So I'm gonna actually take a little bit off here, and you're gonna use way more medium than paint. And you can see my palette is white, and when I pull the paint and the medium together, you can kind of get a sense of how translucent it is going to be. Okay, and I'm going to bring it over here to my piece, and you can see that I am able to see through it. Okay, now that's fairly translucent so far. It's not tinting it a whole lot. So I'm going to add a little bit more acrylic in there and make it a little bit more opaque, because I'm trying to disguise or create a little bit more of an even transition from my collage element into the background. And one of the cool things that I like about matte medium is that here you've gone through all this trouble, maybe modeling something. It looks really good. It's very three-dimensional. All the value is there, but then the tint is off. So you can just literally, instead of going over this and painting it all over again, you can just tint it. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit more of my medium and just apply directly to it. And I'm trying not to get this little girl too dark, but again, I'm trying to use this medium to create a cohesive color scheme. I see one of my pieces peeled up. Okay. And I could introduce some other colors in here, and I probably will, but you guys are getting the idea of how to kind of change the translucency. I like to use some of these lighter colors in here and maybe go in and do a little bit more opaque. This is kind of I think this is flesh pink or ivory, something like that. And I'm being very painterly with my brush strokes. Every once in a while I may like wipe off the excess on my brush and then pull in maybe a little bit more medium. My other favorite tool when I'm working with mixed media is a blow dryer because I am impatient. I want instant gratification. And even though acrylic is pretty quick to dry, I still am impatient for different areas because sometimes you want things to dry before you move on and change the color or the shading or whatever. So I'm just going in right now. I know my brush strokes look a little bit erratic and crazy. That's okay. I am just trying to smooth things out a little bit. Now, I did this a little bit on purpose. Do you see how I got some really broad brush strokes over my image and it's a little bit too opaque? So if that happens, while it's still wet, it should be fine. You can just take a piece of paper towel. I could even dip it in a tiny bit of water and kind of wipe it off. I mean, I use my fingers quite a bit. The medium does create a pretty resilient surface, so you definitely need to make sure you're washing your tools off nicely. So that comes right off, and I could just stamp it with my paper towel if I wanted to. Okay, so if you get too much in an area or you need to subtract, don't hesitate to just get that paper towel out. I'm going to try to blend the edges just a little bit. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to let this dry before the next part. And so what we have accomplished here is we've started out with a beautiful surface. I've shown you how to collage flat pieces of paper down with the matte medium and to use the matte medium as a way to control the opacity and translucency of your paint. And when we come back, we will talk about creating interesting connecting pieces.